evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demon Lab podcast. My name is Andy, and the Demons showed some fighting ANZAC spirit to snatch victory from what looked like the jaws of defeat early in the match. In front of the Demons' biggest home and away crowd in almost 6 decades, 84,000 people witnessed the future of the Demons as the Big Roo announced his presence on the big stage. Joining me tonight to discuss the stressful win at the G is longtime Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Bin Man. Good evening to our listeners. Yeah, that was certainly a stressful but a great win. And boy, am I so glad that we've got 4 umpires on the ground these days. It's just improved the decision-making immensely.
4 umpires is actually good because it's 1 extra umpire that I can yell and scream at. Also joining us to dissect the victory on the big stage at the MCG is Bin Man. Good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And my voice is a bit croaky, so apologies for that. That's from yelling at the footy last night. The umpires may have had something to do with some of that yelling. The irony of that 4th umpire is that if you push the AFL on why they don't make it bloody professional umpires, I don't blame the umpires, I blame the AFL for not investing in it. They'd probably come back and say, oh, well, we can't now because we've got a 4th umpire. They're well-paid amateurs, basically, and you pay amateurs, you get amateur results. It was super frustrating, that's for sure.
Well, we've asked our listeners to provide 5-star reviews and comments on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, and that we'd read out your reviews on the show. So, as always, I ask our loyal listeners, please take a moment now, pause the show, go and write that 5-star review for us to read out next week. Great, you're back. Thank you. Mr. Knowlesy writes, the best D's podcast in the business. I get joy each week listening to the podcast. Every Monday, the 3 amigos provide an in-depth analysis of the game, which fills me with much joy and allows me to let out my MFC SS, which was genetically acquired from my dad. The show provides a mix of light banter and humour that helps me to de-stress after a long day as a nurse. Go D's. Thanks, Mr. Knowlesy. Max's mum writes, it's my guilty pleasure listening to the Demonland podcast every week. I've never missed an episode. Andy, Bimman and George have great energy and are passionate about the club. I appreciate their thorough analysis and enjoy their banter. Keep up the great work, guys. Thanks, Max's mum. I wonder if that is actually Max's mum or just another Max's mum. If you want us to read your 5-star review, head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from. Leave a 5-star review and a comment, and we'll read it out on the air. The 5-star reviews really do help boost the podcast for more people to find us and join in on the fun. If you would like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, please give us a call on 03 9016 3666. That's 03 9016 3666. I'll answer, put you on mute, then bring you on when we can. During the week, you can call that number, leave us a message, and we'll play it on the show. If you're listening live, you can join us in the chat room by simply heading over to demonland.com/podcast. We're live every Monday at 8:30 p.m, except tonight, obviously, because of our ANZAC Eve match last night. If you've downloaded the podcast, want to listen to us live, then please join us on a Monday at 8:30 p.m. at demonland.com.
Dissecting the rounds match from the depths of the game that was, it's over to Andy, Binman and George with the match wrap-up.
I bet you guys weren't expecting that. That was thanks to a loyal listener who sent that in, Michael, but I'm not sure if he wants me to give his full name or where he works or anything like that. So I'll ask him during the week and we'll see what he says. Let's get into the match wrap-up. There was a real finals-like atmosphere for this match with the 84,000 people in attendance. We're so lucky to have snagged this blockbuster. If we can continue to attract the crowds like this, then it's not only good for our bottom line every second year, but it's a great taste for the young kids. In fact, it's great for all the players to get that taste of finals-like footy action during the year. And we'll probably get it again at King's birthday. I actually went into this match very confident. Max was returning to join Grundy against a team without their 2 main ruckmen. Lever and Hibberd were returning, strengthening our defence against a lynchless Richmond. The Tigers had lost 3 on the trot. They have a long injury list. Many of their stars have been a shadow of their past selves recently. and their 2 prize recruits that they sold the farm for just haven't borne any fruit yet. I wasn't expecting it to be a walk in the park, but I really was not expecting the fight that they gave us. A fight, mind you, that in my humble opinion was heavily influenced, as we've mentioned, by some very one-sided adjudication. Now, listeners to the show will know that I love bitching about the umpiring as much as any one-eyed fan. I'm not quite West Coast Eagles fan level of complaining, but I don't mind the odd boo every now and again. And in my youth, I used to leave the footy often unable to speak. My throat was that red raw from the sprays that I would dish out to the maggots in white back in the day. And I've mellowed somewhat as I've matured, and I really can't remember the last time that I returned home from the footy with what felt like razor blades in the back of my throat. Such was the yelling and carrying on that I felt I was compelled to express my displeasure at what I was witnessing on the field last night. I thought we were absolutely crucified by the men in yellow, and whilst a number of the free kicks against us were probably maybe definitely there, and I'll happily concede that some of them were. It's the ones that you don't get in return that kill you. And now I won't get all conspiracy theory about it, but we were definitely given the bum steer last night when it came to the umpiring. I'm actually surprised I can speak now because I really let them know how I felt. And spoiler alert, I didn't feel very good. That said, I don't think we were quite firing at 100% last night. We were very sloppy in a lot of our disposal. Perhaps that's as a result of the game plan we're employing. We're playing on and moving the ball very quickly, taking risks, and that always opens you up to turnovers, particularly if your disposal is not spot on, and it really wasn't that spot on last night. Add to that, I thought we were very fumbly at times, and you would have thought that the conditions were less than perfect conditions that we were playing in. The fall of the ball and the bounce just weren't our friend either. Sometimes the luck goes your way, sometimes it doesn't, and last night it did not. Early on, it looked like our defence was a shambles, and we were on target to concede more than 100 points for the second week in a row, and only the 4th time in 3 years. And fortunately, we steadied the ship, but I think we need to do something about opposition teams winning the footy and scoring from ground ball spillages in our defence. It's definitely an aspect of our game that we need to tidy up upon. Hibbert and May and Lever provided some nice rebounding defence with 12, 11, 10 intercepts respectively, except I think Lever's kicking was a little bit off last night. Welcome back to our captain, Max Gawn. Big Maxi was huge with 6 contested marks, and boy, have we missed that aspect of his game. Nobody does this better than Maxi. The D's took 18 contested marks to 8 last night. Last week, we only took 7 contested marks against the Bombers. The week before, it was 8 against the Eagles, 11 against the Swans, 2 against Brisbane, and 2 against the Bulldogs. So 18 contested marks this week. It's just huge numbers. And I'll talk soon about the boy who took 3 massive contested marks in the final term. Our on-ballers were very important in our clawback from 25 points down, especially Jack Viney, who epitomises the ANZAC spirit with his grit and determination and never-say-die attitude, a very deserving Checker Hughes medalist. He joins his 2 midfield buddies who have won the previous 2 medals. Oliver, Viney and Track had 31, 30 and 26 disposals, and all were very crucial, particularly in the second half. For 3 quarters, our tall forwards were out to sea, and I'm not sure whether it was a combination of some poor forward 50 entries or a lack of forward experience from defender Petty and young JVR, but the last quarter really was something else. Enter Jacob Van Rooyen in just his 4th match with 4 disposals under his belt and no marks and almost being subbed off, according to Goody. Rui has taken 3 huge contested marks, kicked 3 goals. It could have been 4. He announced himself on the big stage in front of 84,000 people and a lot more people watching on the TV at home. Welcome to the future of the Melbourne Football Club. Big shout out to Kay Chandler, who continues to impress as a small goal-kicking forward, solidifying his spot in the side with his 2nd bag of 3 goals for the season, taking his tally for the season to 10. And it was a nervous, frustrating at times match that was topped off magnificently by the fantastic efforts in the last quarter. Banking a win on ANZAC Eve made the crush getting home on the train not just palatable, but very enjoyable. Boys, what did you take away from the match? George, I'll start with you.
I think you've covered it off pretty well there, Andy. It was surprising a few other things. Melbourne are the only team this season to have won all 6 of their final quarters, so that's a good sign for us. It means
by something like 117 points in that last quarter. It's over the opposition. That's huge.
Yeah, we're not running out of legs in the last quarter. The real question is, what are we doing in the first half of the games?
Yeah, it's
What's
interesting.
causing this? So maybe we can find out or talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk also about kicking improvements, but in this match, I think it was quite remarkable. Our disposal efficiency was 79%, which for a Melbourne side, in years gone by, those are unheard of type of numbers. In any game, it's
Yeah.
unheard of. Most teams run, I think, around about the 60, 65 mark, but 79% disposal efficiency.
Yeah, I agree, George. And there was the Tigers were 68%, and given the pressure in that game, 79% is fantastic. It's
Yeah.
it's arguably the difference, isn't it? Because
Yeah,
they turned it over with some howlers, but also missed their shots at goals, which
yeah.
we didn't.
And it's a sign of what we've been developing, putting people like Lockie Hunter into the side with his kicking capabilities, and the work that Choco Williams has been doing with the team on improving their kicking is certainly starting to show some fruit. The only other thing, you've mentioned the back line, you've mentioned Max, of course. I think he's a big critical factor coming back in terms of contested marks. The other interesting one for me out of the game was our one percenters that were really down in a big way in this game. It was 37 for us, 58 for Richmond. That's a big differential. And again, I think it comes from that first half situation. I'm not quite sure what's going on in that first half. They just, the last couple of games, they just don't seem to be switched on. But finally, one big positive for me was James Jordan. I think a lot of people would have missed it in this game. He had 7 score involvements, which was the highest of anybody in the club, the same as Petrarca and Viney, and incredibly had 94% disposal efficiency, which again playing more in
Inside
the midfield.
mid, yeah, exactly.
He's starting to, if he can continue to repeat those sort of numbers in coming games, that's fantastic. One of the other concerns equally on the other side was Kazao was down to 37% disposal efficiency, and he's normally pretty damn good with ball in hand. So there's a few things that are a little bit unusual for us. Wind's great, fantastic. It keeps us, in third position as of today, which is what we need. We're banking wins. I'm sure, as people would have thought at the start of the season, being 4-2 would have been an acceptable pass mark, and it probably is in terms of the whole season. And we've played a number of top 4 teams already this year, unlike others who are sitting up near the top. So it was a good result all round for the game, considering the circumstances.
Yeah, 4-2 would have been sort of the lowest of, we would have taken anywhere 4-2 and above, I reckon. Big man?
Just we'll speak to the game during the show, but just as a general thing, it was just, leaving aside the analysis of the match and all of that, it was just incredible game, to watch. It was great to be at the G with that many people again. I think the last time, well, there was a big crowd, I guess, at the Collingwood game and the Carlton game, but the last time it felt like that for me was that Geelong, or maybe the Hawthorn, the finals in 2018. I was sitting in similar seats. The place was totally rocking, and it's just so exciting to. It's a great game to watch, isn't it? Live. I was thinking about it afterwards, comparing it to soccer. There's just so many opportunities when they kick goals for that emotional release. I don't know how they do it. Watching when you're really passionate about a soccer team, and maybe only scoring a couple of goals a match to have that release. But just as another comment about, it was fantastic to be there live and to see Van Ruin. One, just take that mark. Two, just go back and kick it. It's a absolute really neat technique that stood up under pressure. Super important time, obviously, goes without saying. But just his enthusiasm on field after he marks is infectious in the crowd. Let alone if you imagine playing with him. His teammates so evidently love him, and it was just awesome to hear that chant around the ground. Although I would prefer personally Ruin to Roo. I think Roo's a bit, there's been a Roo before. I think Ruin's got a more devilish sort of ambience to it. So, but it was awesome to be at the G. The weather was perfect. The pre-show stuff was brilliant. It was a great night of the footy and made for a really terrific day today. I must say, my mood would have been much different if we'd lost that game. So, but as you say, it is a super important win. Leaving aside, the quality of the win, it's really, really important because we've got the Roos, Suns, and Hawks in the next 3 games. We'll go in heavy favourites to win all 3. Win those 3, and that's 4 in a row we've won suddenly, and then 7 of the first 9 coming into the sort of muddly bye period. That's exactly where we want to be. I would have thought so. Huge for that reason. Massive for the Tigers. The Tigers. I'll talk to this a little bit. The Tigers basically, apart from some changes around the edges, Melbourne and Richmond almost have an identical game plan at the heart of it, really, and all built on pressure. And they brought the pressure, and kudos to them. And I was sort of reflecting. Often, I think that I fall into the trap of forgetting how good the opposition can be sometimes, and they were fantastic. I thought in that first half, just in effort alone. So great night at the footy, and a huge, really important win.
It's very important because if we'd actually lost that game, we would have been in 10th position on the ladder.
Yeah. And then suddenly it looks different, doesn't it? 3 and 3, 4 and 2. They, even psychologically, it looks different. So, I just the final comment on the game is that at halftime, I was confident, and against Essendon, as I said, I was not confident at all at halftime. But despite the fact that it was a 14-point difference at halftime, it was really the pressure. Our pressure was okay. It was just better than theirs was better. Ours wasn't to where it needed to be. Theirs was better, and you just felt that we still had gas in the tank, and that's how it proved to be. We ran out that game super well.
Some of the numbers are spooky. Some can't be explained by conventional means. But that won't stop the boys from trying. Coming up now, it's the Demonland Stats File.
This week on... you like that one? This week on the stat... You don't like it?
No, I don't mind it.
Oh, you don't mind it. This week on the Stats Files, Big Man wants to talk about scores from turnovers, and we've got a clip from Goody to kick it off. Big Man, you want to
play that at the end? But
all right.
So this week in Stats Files, talked last week about what we can see on the board that goes out. So the message to the players. And we also talked the previous week about what pressure is as rated by Champion Data. It's actually interesting watching the footy in a Channel 7 match because they mustn't have paid up the money to Champion Data to have that because it's only the Fox games that have that meter on during the game. But we talked about pressure being an output data that they don't probably give the players. They probably use that data in their post-match analysis and their individual player reviews. But when they're at quarter time, 3/4 time, and presumably at halftime, and at Casey as well as the Demons, one of the boards they bring out and show the players at the top has contested possession numbers, the differential, whether they're up or down, and what that number is, and time in forward half. I couldn't, as I've talked about, couldn't find time in forward half, but in that publicly available data, Willow Ratings is a great site that pulls down publicly available data, and a proxy for that is probably inside 50s and metres gained. So you could probably get a sense of time in forward half from those two stats. So that is by way of. They're the two of the key stats that the players are, the coaching staff is reinforcing coming into each quarter, obviously underpinning our game. The other stat that I can't, to be honest, don't know is on the board, but I'm thinking it may well be, is turnovers and scores from turnovers. Those three things, contested possession, time in forward half, and turnover, is really our game in a nutshell. We were down in forward half. We were down in a contested possession at halftime. I did get the numbers for the pressure rating. The pressure rating I'm just bringing it up here. The pressure rating at halftime was 166 to 175. So, what we could see with our eyes, their contested ball was better, their pressure was better, their time in forward half was better, Richmond, and their forward half was presumably better as well, although I don't know that for sure. That was our worst pressure factor result this season at halftime, 170 being our previous low number. So it sort of touches on what you were saying, George, about that pressure in the first half. So it wasn't quite there. All of those numbers flipped. I said coming into the match, I wrote on Demonland that if we bring the pressure, win contested ball, force and score from turnovers, and win time in forward half, and take our chances, if all of that happens, we win by 6 goals plus. If we don't bring the pressure, however, and they do, and they're an elite pressure side, we lose that match. So that first half was an example, exactly that. All of those numbers were in favour of Richmond halftime. They were up by 14 points. Come the end of the game, we'd flipped all of those stats. All of those stats were in our favour, even though they ended up winning the contested ball by the end, but we matched them in the second half. The other big stat, of course, was the ground balls, but that they probably don't look at that. That's a function of pressure. So we flipped all of those stats in the second half, and we outscored them by what we ended up winning by 15 points or something, wasn't it? So 5-goal turnaround.
18 points.
18
Actually,
points.
we did have a post, a Red Sox man, who did ask you a question specifically about the pressure. I'll just read it out now, give him his due. Can you please comment on the pressure in the game and what was the pressure index for each side during the game and for the total game? I felt the game was really frenetic. So Big Man has answered that, Red Sox man.
And I don't know what the number was at the end. That was the halftime stats, and
But our pressure had 1,000% gone up.
Yeah, totally. And so, the reason I sort of focus on those things is because when Goody talks about the game, he tries to simplify it all the time. And obviously that's what he has to do with his players. He's simplifying it. They don't need complication out on the field. They need clarity of what their KPIs are, and under pressure be able to know where they stand on them. And, it's enough for them just to say, go harder, and these things will happen. And that, they obviously don't say your pressure rating is 162. It needs to get to 169. And so, yeah, time in forward half, contested ball, the pressure is a function, and turnover scores from turnovers. We're a high score from turnover team, and so are Richmond. And so I just wanted to finish up playing this clip from Goody's presser. And the thing I'm really loving about Goody's presser is you just got to listen to him. He's so clear now about what we're trying to do. And if you have time also, I'd recommend listening to Hardwick's presser as well, because it's a fascinating press conference, and he's becoming more and more honest every week, it seems like, Hardwick. He's barely hiding anything behind subtext or innuendo. He's pretty clear, including a comment I think we'll talk about later, his comment about he knows what it takes to beat Melbourne. So I thought that was a fascinating comment. So he also talks about the same things in describing what happened in the first half for them and what happened in the second half and where they lost the game, in exactly the same language that Goody uses in this clip now. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, look, I think we started to get the turnover game right. I thought, probably early in the game, we probably overpossessed the ball at times and turned the ball over in critical areas. And to Richmond's credit, they're a good turnover team, and they rebounded really strongly and hit the scoreboard. So our ability to tidy up ball in hand and helped our defence to a lot of degree. And I thought we started to really ramp up our contest stuff as the game went on. We started to get the ball in our half, and our big boys got to work. They started to mark the ball and have a big impact forward to centre. So it was a win full of character in terms of the way our team have been. That's coming from 25 points down. Sometimes you've got to win differently, and tonight was one of those times.
Thanks, Andy. So in our game in a nutshell, that's probably the similar sorts of message he gives to the boys at, half-time and three-quarter time in last night's match, or certainly, probably at all the quarter breaks. Our game in a nutshell, and as I said, Hardwick basically repeats exactly that about Richmond's game plan and what happened for them to fall away.
Just on these press conferences that they do, I would love it if the AFL could go down to JB Hi-Fi and perhaps invest in just one or two microphones to put out in where the journos are, because you cannot hear the questions at all. And just one directional microphone held up by the work experienced kid will just do the trick with that. It's just absolutely pathetic for a professional organisation.
Pro tip, Andy, you can hear them, the questions, if you... I know this because I listen to the present today with my headphones. You can hear the questions if you're wearing headphones.
Oh, well, come on.
Well, I could hear those questions. The questions he was asked today were actually, and Hardwick, I could hear what they were asking. So,
all right. Well,
and the same situation's been going on for years and years. You know, it doesn't take much, like you said, to hang a few mics from the roof of these things. I mean, you know, the MCG, they're playing a couple of games a week. Surely they could invest in, like you said, two or three JB Hi-Fi microphones. But, you know, let's go spend a couple of $100 million supporting other areas.
Yeah.
Whilst I was speaking of stats, though, the key stat that Hardwick referenced was they didn't take their chances.
Yep.
They missed their chances. Yep. Miller missed the shot. Like there were a number. I just watched the last quarter, the last half just before, just a little while ago. And geez, they missed some clunkers, didn't they? And, you know, he was still fuming about that. You know, well, maybe we can get Williams on for an interview or something, because our kicking for set shot kicking is just improved absolutely out of sight. And it's why we won the game, essentially.
Yeah, I think he said from set shots, they kicked 5 goals 9, and we kicked 9 goals 6 or something like that. And
the number was in his head, wasn't it, George? So it was right in the... And the two players, like, I mean, Langdon and Nibbler have both improved their general field kicking, but both of those players have changed their set shot routine and how they do it. And the goal that Langdon kicked, that just was dead straight. Like he's one of the least likely players 2 or 3 years ago to kick a ball dead straight. But
even Oliver with his set shot, that was clutch on 3/4 time. That really got us sort of... You saw all the boys gather around him and really fired everyone up, fight the crowd up. There's got to be.
Yeah, that was
we
huge,
always cry when oppositions would get a goal on, on the siren and sort of G themselves up, and it would cost us in years gone by, and that's to have it roles reversed.
In case we don't end up talking about it, that lead up to that play was massive for that game, because Pickett didn't take the ball out. It was just dumb. Like he had every opportunity to be able to let it go over the boundary line. The clock's ticking down. The sign's up. He's looking at the 30-second sign. He elects not to, and that's where Gus came in. It was incredible guts to get his feet taken out from under him. That it ended up getting that ball to Oliver after some. Maybe that was a throw by Jordan. I don't know, to Sparrow, but it was a clever kick from Sparrow inboard to Oliver. But as you say, for Oliver to go back and kick it, and he was really deliberate, he's shortened his run up, much more straight chest on. The boys went nuts, didn't they? They're like the energy. And so we went into that break that was right below me, and it was buzzing. The stand was buzzing. The crowd was buzzing. It just brought that energy into that final quarter. That was a massive moment in that game.
We've all got opinions and we've all got our own thoughts, but we like to get another take on it. You can get your questions and say through on 0390163666 and via demonland.com. It's time to hear from you with your listener questions on the Demonland podcast.
Each week, we ask Demonlanders to post their questions and comments in the week's podcast thread on demonland.com. We always read them out, answer them on the show. If you're not a member of Demonland, just head over... Or if you just listen to the podcast, and what are you waiting for? Head over to demonland.com, sign up and join in on the conversations. In addition to asking questions for the podcast, there are a plethora of other conversations about all things D's related going on. If you really want to ask a question but aren't on Demonland, shoot us an email at demonland@demonland.com with a subject question for the podcast. You can also leave us a voicemail at 0390163666. That's 0390163666. And don't worry, nobody answers, so you don't have to talk to anybody. If you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, just slide into our DMs and ask your question there. We'll keep your real name anonymous if you wish. And to kick off our listener questions, we have a voicemail from friend of the show, Noah from Bentley, who has a question for you, Bin Man. Here we go.
Hey, this is Noah from Bentley. Love the podcast, guys. Weird question I just wanted to ask is, why is Bin Man called Bin Man? Does he like taking the bins out? Just curious. Love the podcast. As always, go Dean.
I'm pretty sure we've heard the answer to this one before, but my short-term memory is not great. And I imagine the same thing, that you are a bin man. You're a garbage man, I take it.
Well, that's good that it's lodged in your memory. The reason you've heard the answer is because Viney asked me when I called in. So he asked me that question. Obviously, didn't register for you.
No.
But while I think of it, those voiceovers, which are, by the way, for everyone who's listening, that's new to George and I, that was sprung on us tonight. That's brilliant, Andy. Top work.
That's the last one. So, Michael, if you want to make some more for our other segments, I love them. Or anyone
brilliant.
else, you've got skills. Anyone who's got skills that listens, demonland@demonland.com. Send them through.
Michael's got mad skills. So the segue from mad skills is the reason Bin Man it was my DJ name. So it sounds bigger than it was, but I DJ'd at a pub for a couple of years on once a month. And my DJ name was, my name was Bin Man Presents, because I got at that stage, I've stopped collecting CDs now. I'm streaming, but I got all my music out of the JB bins, discount bins. So who can afford $30 for a CD? So I've got a massive CD collection, and it was built on the back of JB Hi-Fi's discount bins. I needed a name for my DJ, and so Bin Man Presents. And then when I signed up on Demonland, I'd never been on such a forum before, and you were asked for a name, or you asked to complete a name, and I thought, well, Bin Man works. So, and it's lowercase b, so it's, I'm not taking airs or pretending I'm a professional bin master.
So if I look up DJ Bin Man, am I likely to find?
No DJ, just Bin Man. Bin Man Presents.
Just Bin Man. Okay.
No, you won't. That pub's closed. That chapter's closed.
Is that pub closed because of you? Or,
no. In fact, there's a crossover to Dacos there, but it's an infamous pub for Collingwood's use of recreational assistance back in the day. But that's moving on.
There you go. Now you know. Mandy Lorian says, loving the show, guys. Gets better and better each week. Would love to hear your thoughts on last night's umpiring. You're never going to get the rub of the green or the yellow every week, but you hope that the officiating doesn't impact the results. The umpires really tried their hardest last night to get the Tigers over the line. And I'll go to you in a second, Bin Man, but my throat was red raw for my displeasure at the umpiring last night. And for me, as I said at the top of the show, it's always the ones that you don't get that kill you. It's the stat that gets absolutely no metrics, so you have nowhere to point to when you shout into the abyss that is your friends or loved ones who could not care less about what you're ranting about, Bin Man.
Well, I really, really try not to let poor umpiring get to me when I'm at the footy, because life's too short, isn't it? So, and also I remind myself that it evens up. You get some, and the opposition gets some. But last night it was flat out, it was appalling, and it seemed to me, maybe it's because I had my demon glasses on, is that we copped the really bad ones. There was some bad ones their way, but we copped the really gariest ones. None worse than I thought the non-50 to Nibbler, and I was thinking about this beforehand, and then I just watched the replay, and there is one worse than the non-50 to Nibbler, which was the inexplicable free kick for holding the ball or whatever it was against Gus from Rioli coming cannoning into him. I mean, that was borderline reportable. He gets him high
because he gets 2 weeks
and a free kick. I mean, that would be an anomaly, wouldn't he? He gets weeks and he gets a free kick. But the one to Nibbler just drove me nuts, because that scenario is exactly the reason the 50 was brought in the first place. When a player wants to release straight away after a kick or a handball after a stoppage, and his opponent stops him from doing
wasn't even it wasn't the direct opponent from the mark. It was the guy that came in after.
Exactly. But that's why the 50 was brought in, because often I think the 50 is a joke. It's such a big penalty for infringing on a zone that doesn't do anything. But it was brought in for this scenario, because he 100% would have released that ball if not for that. And then afterwards, he did release it. Now, if Nibbler was able to give it to Langdon immediately, we were away and we had multiple players ahead of the ball, we would have 100% scored. And of course, if he got the 50, he would have been 20 metres out directly in front. So he kicks that goal. And you could argue there's a two-goal swing right there, because let's say Nibbler gets that goal either because he's given an off or the free kick's given, the 50's not given, but is given and he kicks the goal. So we don't get that goal. And yes, the handball to Langers was sloppy, but he was just trying to do what Rioli stopped him from doing. So I'll give him a pass on that. But they then scored on the turnover. And, the other one that drives me nuts, it just drives me so infuriating, is the blocks that were given us. Now, okay, let's say both the blocks that were given against us were there. Okay, we'll give them. Then how on earth could Max not get 4 or 5 free kicks a match?
He should get frees all the time.
They not only do they block against him, they scrag him, they physically hold him, and that's not even taking into the discussion the hits across the head he gets. It just drives me, it's infuriating. And I just think that, as I said before, you can't blame the umpires. The AFL should just get serious and make it professional and bite the bullet. Surely to goodness, the excuse, I've heard 2 excuses, and we've talked about this before on the podcast. One is that it's too expensive to professionally play all the umpires you'd need for the games that are played on a weekend. I reckon that's just rubbish. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. The other one is there's a little bit more strain, is that you won't get an improvement in the outcomes because they're already elite. And I just don't buy that. If you don't perform, you don't get paid. Professionals will be at the peak of their game and you'll get the best decision makers, but you just can't have a game influence. Like we lose that game, we won that game. So I'm complaining after a win. But if we could have lost that game because of the umpiring, in $1 billion, that could be the difference between us finishing 5th or 4th. It's just not good enough.
There were a couple of other howlers as well. There was the Gus diving spoils in front of Dusty to save.
Brilliant bit of work.
A guy like Dusty would go on and probably kick a goal from there. It was amazing work. Called deliberate out of bounds. I'm sorry. You got to go with the spoil has to, otherwise every spoil that's ever knocked out has got to be a thing. One, Petrarca gets absolutely barreled in straight into his back holding the ball. All right, you can get that. Not long after, same thing. Hunter tackles someone on the wing, doesn't even fall into the back. It's in the back. It's just there was no consistency. In decisions, and it was, and even Lever the 50 meter against Lever on the mark. He was behind the guy on the mark. He's allowed to move.
Nah, he encroached in the 5 metre zone. There's a 5 metre. More
but
the argument there. Never gets
even
paid,
if he's behind. Even if he's behind the guy on the mark, is that within the 5 metres? You got to be 5 metres from the guy on the mark.
No. Mind you, if you go back to the round 23 game against Geelong 2 years ago, you might have seen 18 players.
18 players and the pie man in there. And all the trainers. And,
But the other one that really annoyed me was when Cumberland got that free kick when he ran into McVie.
That was...
and fell on the ground. And he ran into McVie from and they're given a free kick, and then
McVie thought it was his free kick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for good reason, because he'd been run into. But anyhow,
so on the paid professional, this is the thought experiment that I had, was try to think of the last time there was a grand final ruined by bad umpiring. What does that tell you? That tells you the very best umpires are selected to umpire in the grand final. Well, every single game of footy at this elite level should be good enough to have the best people doing it, not having, 70% of the game umpired averagely, and then come finals, they get better. That's not a way to run a competition.
Most grand finals are usually blowouts. The umpiring doesn't really affect it, but ask any Collingwood supporter what they think about the umpiring in the 2018 grand final.
I think the umpiring in Collingwood grand finals has been magnificent.
Yes, that's right.
Bigfoot says, I've noticed that we've been using the underground handball a number of times this season, and it was used quite often last night. What do you think of this tactic? Effective, yay or nay? Big man, have you noticed the tactic of using the underground, for want of a better term, handball? What are your thoughts on this? Have you noticed other teams doing this, or are we pioneers?
Other teams have been doing. Doggies have been doing it for a while. It's something. Maybe that's something Hunter's brought with him. I mean, and I've
he's
seen
been
Gus
doing
use
it a lot.
Quite a
Yeah.
Gus does it not as regularly as is happening this season, but the Dogs do. I mean, the Dogs have got 1,000,001 ways to throw and handball, and but it's always forward. So it's really about chaining them up, and we'll talk a little bit later about that sort of experimentation. And it's good, But that's definitely something Hunter did at the Dogs, or you know, all the time. Whether it's effective, it seemed to be last night. I mean, most of them hit their target, didn't they, and allowed us to continue moving the ball forward. So
it's very effective because when you're really hemmed in and you've got 2 or 3 players defending where you want to go over the top is really fraught with danger. There's a good chance it's going to be intercepted. You go underground, and the worst that's going to happen is it's going to go into their feet, and it's going to finish up, right in front of you. Nothing lost. But if it gets through, you've suddenly broken their defence and got through the other side. And Hunter's a great exponent of it. So was Liberatore. That's where it's come from. With the Dogs, it's their ability to get to the ball to the other side of the contest. And once you break out, as we know in the game these days, it's absolutely critical. And the other advantage you've got with the AFL ball is that you can spin it forward. You hit it properly so that it bounces forward. It's not like basketball where a bounce pass actually is a slow pass. But even in basketball, the only reason you do the bounce pass is to get through someone, not to try and get around them. But to see it executed so well that Hunter does is a real plus to us, and that's why the chain of movement keeps moving up the ground, because of the ability to do that sort of thing.
Spot on, George. And I mean, there's been some really good commentary on different shows this year about the sort of evolution of the game, and that's one that they're talking about a lot. Is that that the ability for teams now almost to put a big circle of pressure around where the ball is, like in a radius around it. You've got to get out that side of that ring, and the amount of pressure that's put on both from behind and players coming towards the player with the ball means that there's often 3 or 4 or 5 handballs when a huge pressure game like today's game and last night's game they'll often be 3 or 4 before they can get it out, but once they can get it past that bubble, that's when they can do some damage, and Collingwood are so good at it. And but that's a really good point, George, about the percentages, the probability. You're right, I hadn't thought of that. It is a lower risk than handballing over the top of someone, because you risk then getting intercepted and the opposite happening and getting outside that pressure bubble.
You mentioned we'd talk later about experimentation. Well, we don't have a question about that. That was just something we brought up in the thing. So, George, did you want to talk about experimentation, or want to?
I think it was in line with a few of the questions that we're getting. There's been criticisms of that. Goody's too staid. He doesn't try things. But all around the ground, particularly in this game and in the previous games as well, we're seeing experiments all over the ground, and maybe that's part of the reason why we haven't seen the stability in certain areas, apart from certain players being unavailable. But when you really stand back and have a good look at what's happening, for example, in the middle, we've, apart from Viney and Petrarca and Oliver, who are the natural first 3 options, we've had Cozzy, A and B, Brayshaw, Chandler, Rivers, Sparrow and Jordan all being run through the middle, trying out different players and what they can produce. Now, it's a couple of those experiments only lasted 1 or 2 goes, and they've obviously said, well, that didn't work, let's move on to something else. But this is the chance that we've got early in the season to find out what we need to do when it gets down to the pointy end of the season. We've seen Petty move forward as an experiment. Whether that's worked, maybe it has, maybe it hasn't. But what we do know is that Petty's, again, an option to be moved forward should the need arise later on in the season where we might be a player or 2 down. We need someone else to go there. We're seeing the rucks resting forward. the use of Grundy and Max in the forward line as another tall target. Again, another experiment, whereas previously the rucks had tend to stay a kick behind the play out of the forward line. Now we're using one of them at least to be a target as well in the forward line. What I have noticed in the last 2 or 3 games is Petrarca, Viney, and Oliver all spending a lot more time together in the midfield roles. They'll then roll a couple of the substitutes in and out, but there seems to be a lot of time that these three are spending together, particularly at critical points in the game. McVee's another one that's been, I thought was, for the chopping block at the end of last season. Well, to have a kid come in on the first game this season, and boy, has he been a great experiment and a great win from that perspective. And he's fitting in so beautifully with the rest of the backline team. It's going to be really, really interesting when Salem comes back in a couple of weeks. So, yeah, I'm seeing experiments going on all around the ground. I'm seeing experiments with the rucking, because it is a bit of an unknown at the moment. Grundy is a completely different ruckman to what Max is. The midfielders have got to learn to work with him. But all around the ground, we're seeing things being tried. It's not the same old thing every week, the same players being run through the same positions. So, I can't broke the argument that Goody's two stayed and doesn't change anything. There's plenty of changes going on at the ground. You've only got to look.
It's quite it's a coincidence that we both had thinking around the experiment. I think it's, from my perspective, I was thinking about it because Goody was asked a question about, you seem to be experimenting with the forward line, and so it got me thinking about Goody and his sort of experimental. And it's funny with Goody because, we talked about a lot on the podcast, how systems based he is, but he seems to have been pigeonholed even amongst Demon fans as someone who's a bit tactically unsophisticated or unprepared to change, or who doesn't take risks and just relies on this system working. In 21 and into 22, we did rely on the systems. That's because we were saying to other teams, you've got to dismantle our system. Our system was working. But if you look back on his career so far, he's been, it just doesn't fit. That narrative doesn't fit the reality. I mean, he brought in, I think, 2016 when Ruse was still coaching, and brought it into 2017, that diamond setup that he had running off the halfback flank. He's, in 2019, he retooled basically the game plan to set up the defensive zone that won us the flag in 2021. 2018, we were moving the ball super, super fast off the halfback flank, and we were rolling teams. We found it really difficult to defend against the really good teams, but we got on a sort of momentum wave, and it really reminds me about how the Pies are playing now, and everyone sort of, suggesting that the Pies have introduced this incredible tactical innovation. Well, that Goody was doing that in 2018. As I said, retooled all of that in 2019 to create that defensive system that has been so effective, and we're now needing to change. He's got a pattern now of trying heaps of different forward lines. Even in our premiership year of 2021, it wasn't until round 19, round 20 that he'd settled the forward line, and he must have been asked 1,000 times that season the same question about experimenting up forward, where you're going to land, and even last year introducing the long handballs that we talked about on the podcast, the 20-30 metres handballs going forward. They're now absolutely standard across the AFL. Goody introduced that handball. That was Goody getting it, outside that ring that you were talking about before, George. And I think that with that experimenting, I think that he's looking now at the game where it's heading. My own view is that this run and gun style, will be worked out to a degree, and that Goody's is experimenting at the moment. Partially, I think, thinking about Goody's talked a lot about the notion is there's 3 phases in a season, and early on into the end, but the finals is a completely different way of a completely different season, and his mind is on what's going to win finals. I also think there's a little bit of I don't know, there's a bit of, I don't know what you'd call it, keeping the players on their toes psychologically and introducing new energy, new ideas. But on last night, the game, there was times when we didn't look natural. Like that there's discussion about us not being able to slow the tempo. We didn't look like, it wasn't our look until the second half. It didn't look like our game, but that was it didn't look like they'd fully, knew what their game plan. So that it's really risky to be trying something new again with that fast ball movement. We never seem to stop, and we maybe part of that is to run the opposition into the ground, and confident that we'll run over the top of them, which happened in this match. So, I think he definitely is a coach that tries innovation, and the forward setup is just one more example of it.
Royal Demon says, just watched the match from my village near Bristol in the UK, and I must say it was so great to have Big Maxi back in the side. We really missed his contested marking all over the ground. 60 contested marks for the match. There is no replacement for that. How much better is having two genuine rucks in the side and not having to pull a part-time ruck from his role to fill in. Awesome podcast, guys. Keep up the stellar work. George, how good was it to have Max back? Doing Max Gawn things on the MCG, I think we really missed that aerial supremacy that he brings to the side.
I think it was more than supremacy. We just missed his aerial ability all around the ground in the last 3 weeks where he wasn't available. It was
even
just
in
critical.
the 4 weeks.
You saw the stats that you brought at the start of the program. An average of 8 contested marks a game in the preceding games, and all of a sudden Max turns up and he takes 6 on his own.
Richmond had 8.
And dropped a few that looked like he, early on he looked a bit ring rusty, didn't he?
Yeah, he did a little bit, but just having them back. And the other thing I think which was so critical in this game is that Jacob van Rooyen hasn't learnt to play that role that T-Mac and Ben Brown do up the field with those type of contested marks. So an absence of the full forward or the half forward fulfilling that role and being picked up by Max was absolutely critical in this game. Grundy's not a great contested mark at the best of times around the ground. He's not one who jumps off the deck very much, so it's not surprising. But he manages to grind the opposition down pretty well. But having Max back was just very, very important. If maybe his time away in the last couple of weeks should have been spent with Choco trying to kick goals as well. So that would have made the result even better.
He had a knee injury, George.
No excuse. Beyond all of that, George, also his leadership. Where I'm sitting, the huddle is pretty close, and I've got my binoculars on him, and he's head and shoulders above most of his teammates. And at his quarter time and half time and pre-game and 3/4 time addresses looked super animated, and just his body language on the field, and it just an incredible leader of the club. I really think that the game at the moment, moving with this fast ball movement, as I said last week, I think this season there'll be more anomalous results than in other seasons, because it's a game style that's dependent on a whole range of variables like fatigue that are hard to nail down. So, I think given that, our system, we can't rely on our system to get us through in the way that we might have in 21 in the first half of 22. And I think that potentially means an out like Maxi has a much bigger impact than it might have in last year. I mean, he's always going to be a huge impact, him out. But maybe a better example is Spargo. I think, it's easy to not get a sense of how important Spargo is to our system, to just the way we play. He's up and down the ground running, I don't think was replaced. So his defensive work was really not replaced. I think Cozzy might have done a little bit of it. Maybe other players like Sparrow did some of that work that Spargo did. But Spargo is the gun in that position. No one's going to replace him. So I think that, with the game in a bit more sort of, a bit more unpredictable, it means that, the individual quality of the players out has a bigger impact than it might have if the system can protect against that or mitigate against it.
Delightful Play says, seems like there were two key moves made in the second half which potentially unlocked the game in our favour. First, someone on Demonland, can't remember who, sorry, noted that when Gus moved through the midfield, this corresponded with us getting goals. Interested in your thoughts about this and midfield rotations beyond our main three men more generally. Second, Tigers subbed Miller off in the early final quarter. Seems like the shuffle in players helped JVR his opportunity to take contested mark and convert to goal. Confidence raised, suddenly on. Love the potty. George, a big man, how closely were you following rotations and changes in his delightful play onto something here?
I think we spoke a little bit about this in the experimenting. We see this all the time. Gus was fantastic because he's moved from one area to another, to another, to another. He played some in the midfield. He played a back line. He was defending at times, things like that. The other really critical one that people don't notice was Hibbert going to Cumberland. So Cumberland had kicked 3 goals in the first quarter and was, ripping the game apart on his own on Richmond's behalf. Hibbert went to him and he got 2 possessions for the rest of the game. That's the sort of thing that you take away all the output that the side's able to generate out of the game in one player. That's the sort of critical aspects that people perhaps don't notice so much, but that's what wins your games. Just these little critical moves in not just from positioning of players, but the roles that players are assigned during the games.
Was Hibbert on Dusty prior to that? I think he started on him.
I think he'd chop. I'd have to watch it again, but I think tag teaming with the Judster, I think.
Yeah.
Because Dusty was getting up the ground. I was amazed, actually, that Dusty got 23 possessions. Like, that must be the 23 least impactful possessions. I know he kicked 1-3. So, but I was really surprised when I saw that number because, 3 years ago, Dusty gets 23 possessions. They win that game, don't they?
He's not the same.
He gets the possessions, but he can't get that extra yard break.
Yeah, exactly.
You saw it in that last quarter where he was able to do that, and he was effective then. But same with Cochin. That's what happens to the players when they get to that certain age. You haven't got that extra yard that you used to, and you
particularly
get
for power players, who rely
Cochin
on their
played.
from.
Cochin played a lot better last night than I have seen him play in the previous couple of weeks, though.
Yeah. We always play players back into form. That's the old But on the question, I think, I'm not sure about who came off. Miller?
They said Miller, yeah.
I mean, that might have created a shuffle, but I'm not sure that's directly linked to Rui going off in that 3-4 minutes of brilliance.
They were pack.
Bolter, like they're all pack marks. So
strong pack marks that they had Richmond players there that could defend and
but Gus
Ryan Sampson was still down there as well. So
and all of the 2 marks that he took, or 3 marks that he took, were all in big packs up. But Gus did have some really important centre clearances. I actually think that of the centermen, of the players playing in the centre, it was JJ in the second half, who really, for me, was the one that sort of turned the tide. And to be honest, I think I didn't pick this up watching the game at the ground, but in the replay, is how super influential Grundy was in the second half. And I was really surprised. So I think this was an important change. I was really surprised how much Max rucked in the first half. I would have thought, I said coming into the game I expected 70% up forward for him, but I reckon it was close 60% in the ruck. And when he pushed more forward and was more forward and let Grundy go to work, I think Grundy did a better job of hitting, of getting clearances, dangerous clearances in the second half. But George, I think I didn't notice this during the game, but Hardwick noted that, and it was fascinating actually. So your point about Hibbert going on to Cumberland, that it's Cumberland, isn't it? Yeah, Noah Cumberland. That was massive. That's what Hardwick basically said. And if you listen to that presser again, it's his unvarnished honesty. He really pretty much has a go at Cumberland. Have a listen to it. I'm not sure did you listen to it, George?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
he basically said he went missing, and that Hibberd gave him a bath, but his body language was poor, and that he's been given away some things to go away and work on. Guys kicked three goals in the first quarter?
Yeah, three in the first quarter.
Yeah, and he's getting a spray, pretty big one at post game. But basically that's what Hardwick said, is that Hibberd turned the game really. So I think Goody talked about Hibbo's role as well. I didn't pick that change up during the match, so that was huge.
It all goes to show you got to time when to kick your 3 goals. If you kick them in the last quarter, you save yourself a trip to Casey the next week.
Well,
you do it in the first quarter and you go to Casey.
Well, I was saying just before JVR went off, I said he's going. He'll go to Casey next week.
100%. I was
talking to my mate. He said, that's not too bad for his development. I said, yeah, no, that's fine to go back. And Goody said in his presser that he was about to sub him off, and then he was asked, well, when were you going to sub him? Or why didn't you? And he said he took the mark.
Yeah, he was due for the next rotation out off the field.
Exactly. Next rotation, he was off. He doesn't take that mark. I reckon he does play at Casey next week.
Yep.
Singer says, thank you guys for the podcast. It's a must listen every week. Love the analysis from all 3 hosts. You all have a different style, approach and opinion, and your love of the game and the club shines through. You raise the bar each week in terms of quality and content. I really appreciate the effort you go to, so thank you. How immense was JVR's last quarter? To be honest, at 3-quarter time, I thought he would be heading back to Casey next week with only the 4 possessions to his name. But that last quarter, wow, 4 kicks, 3 massive contested marks, 3 goals, all on the big stage. Imagine when he puts 4 quarters of that together, he's going to be huge. Love the podcast. We've just been talking
4
about
quarters. He would kick 12 goals a match, and that would be Lockett-like. I talked about last week that in this corresponding game, I think it was the first ANZAC game actually, how exciting it was to see Hogan go, kick 5 in that match. Was brilliant, but it was just as exciting, wasn't it, to see, that mark was awesome. It was just awesome.
George, anything you want to add on Rui?
No, nothing more. Can we yet? Will we see him next week is the big question.
Well, we'll talk when we talk changes, but I don't know if you can drop him after that. As I said, dull timing of when you kick the 3 goals.
Yeah, there'd be a bit of pearl clutching in the MCC, wouldn't there?
Well, I guess if he kicked 3 in the first and then had 4 touches for the rest of the match, it's like, well, no, I don't know if you can drop a guy after that anyway. We've got a couple of questions about our best forward line setup and also in regards to Petty as a forward back or a forward. So I'll read them all out. We've got a few all sort of touch on the same theme, so I'll read them all out, give them their due. Radelaide says, last quarter and Rui's fantastic breakout quarter aside, what did you boys think about our forward line setup? I'm not sure if it was the delivery into the forward 50, but I just don't think the current setup is working. We weren't getting the same work rate up the field along the wings from Petty and JVR that we get with Brown and T-Mac. I'm not sure Petty is suited to the role, happy to swing him forward in a pinch, but he's a defender. I know this has been discussed over and over and the situation is fluid, but what is the best forward setup for the Ds? Yes, it was a win for the ages, says, hi guys, we seem to be struggling for the right mix in the back line and forward line. Is the common denominator Petty here? I can see what the Brains Trust are trying to do with the smaller back line to make us a better ground ball side. Are we better served with Petty down back and Big Benny Brown spearheading our attack when fully fit? I guess it's dependent on matchups. El Diablo 14 asks, what we've seen so far this season, in your opinion, what's the best forward line setup that we have? D Old Fart says, simple question, but in my opinion, not such a simple answer. Going forward this year and longer term, is Harry Petty more important to our team as a key position forward or a key position defender? I understand that the answer to this question may be covered in discussion of other questions above. Keep up the great work, guys. Cos GTV says, love your work, guys. I had a great night watching the game after work at a mine site in WA. May have been the only D supporter, but didn't stop me getting loud and proud. With the soft fixture in the coming rounds, it would be great to see us put the foot down and really get healthy percentage boost prior to the tougher run after the bye. I'd like to see JVR, Brown, Fritsch have a run together with our elite small forwards in Chin, Spargo and Cozzy. Our mid should be dominating these young sides and provide some quality delivery inside 50, which they will lead up. What do you see as our best forward setup leading into this period of opportunity? Now, look, I think it's extremely important to note, and I've said this in the past few weeks, that this season to date, we have really not been settled at all in defence. We've had May, Lever and Hibberd all spending time either together or separately out injured. We've had Petty being used forward, then back, then forward again. Up forward, we haven't been settled either, with T-Mac being injured, then dropped, returning and dropped again. Benny Brown missing the last 3 weeks injured. Petty, who isn't a natural forward and hasn't trained to play forward this season, going back to forward, forward to back. Rui playing in just his 4th match. Fritsch missing the end of the preseason through injury and then the first match. We haven't had a settled defence or forward line. And add to that, Max missing the 4 weeks, including the round 2 match when he was injured. That threw out the whole Max/Brodie alliance with the ruck/forward line plan that we had trained for all preseason. All of our lines have been affected in some way by injuries and nothing has been settled. And so I guess to get to, yes, it's a win for the ages statement about struggling to find the right mix in the back line and forward line, and whether the common denominator is Petty, I think it's a bit unfair to lay the blame solely at the move of Petty. We really haven't seemed to be able to get the right mix yet because we haven't had all the pieces in place. And yes, injuries do happen. And happens to every team. Richmond, you saw, injury riddled. St Kilda, the same. You just have to adjust, and I get that. And personally, I think Petty forward works better when he's perhaps the third tall. That is when one of T-Mac and Big Benny Brown, along with Rui, and then Petty, or using Petty purely as that swing forward role as needed in a particular game. And last night, it didn't seem to be working with just Petty and Rui as the tall forwards. I think we would have been better last night with a Ben Brown or even T-Mac being able to lead up along the lines, along the wings, as Radelaide mentioned. We had no forwards last night playing that particular role, playing the traditional centre-half forward. Form and injuries have cruelled us because we really need Brown and or a T-Mac playing that role in the forward line while Rui's in there cutting his teeth and he can learn sort of from them. Both players are on, both players being T-Mac and Ben Brown are on the wrong side of 30 when we need them fit and in the side playing those traditional tall forward roles. We just didn't see any of that type of up the wings leading from the 2 forwards we had there last night. In terms of Petty better down back, it all depends on the matchups. If we're playing Carlton tomorrow with Curnow and Mackay and Silvani, then Petty has to play down back, no question. George, the question of our best forward setup comes up again and again and again every week. Radelaide, El Diablo 14, D Old Fart, Cos GTV have all asked it in the podcast questions thread. What's our best forward setup?
I think the answer was provided by you and every one of the other listeners. We simply haven't had everybody available every week in the forward line. The reason Petty was moved forward was because Ben Brown and T-Mac were out injured at various times, and you're left with a 19-year-old Van Rooyen who wasn't there in the first game. You don't want to leave him all on their own. So who else have we got? We've moved Petty up. I think we'll see as T-Mac and Ben Brown become available again, I think you'll see Petty move to the back line. That will further boost the back line as well. I think we saw plenty of cases in this particular game where the presence of someone like Petty in the back line would have avoided those little spillages and ground ball gets that Richmond were able to take advantage of in this game. Once Petty goes back there, the back line will be back to the in the absence of injuries, we'll be back to their very best. The forward line, we've already spoken about it, you're going to have to expect rotations in the forward line. T-Mac and Ben Brown are on the wrong side of 30. They're getting more injuries as it goes on. You've got to have the players available to be able to fill the holes when that happens. You're not going to expect a 19-year-old Van Rooyen to play the next 20 games. It's not going to happen. So you'll see rotations in there between and these are the bigs. I'm not very very much a fan of the resting ruck in the forward line. In this particular game, there was one mark by the resting rucks, and that was Max when he marked it, or didn't he, on the goal line and shinned it through. So that was great. But again, it didn't work when they're a target, but they're not actually marking the ball. So you need other people in there alongside, or whether it's just part of this experimentation. What has been interesting is that Petrarca and Oliver haven't been moving down forward as a resting option in the last couple of games. I think they're spending more time in the middle and they're actually resting on the bench more so. So that's interesting. There's another change in the forward line that people may not have noticed. The other one that perhaps is a bit of a concern is the small forwards. We've got Neil Bullen, Chandler, Fritsch, Pickett, and Spargo have been running in those roles. I don't think we can play all of them. In this game, the tackles inside 50 for the whole game were 6, of which 2 were from Petty, 1 from Petrarca. So we only got 3 tackles inside 50 from all these small forwards that we've got. We really miss Spargo because he's usually a big contributor in this area. But the other thing is that Fritsch is kicking goals. Pickett hasn't been kicking goals in the last couple of games. Chandler fortunately has. He's kicked 10 goals this year, including 3 in this match. Mm-hmm. But when you're down the forward, you can't just be a defensive forward you've got to kick goals as well. We need output. We need output from these.
You're suggesting dropping Nibbler?
Yeah, I'd be in that, but
it's like, so that's not one of the KPIs for Nibbler or Spargo. So
kicking goals.
No, it's not. It's simply not. And in fact, but Nibbler has kicked a goal in every game this season so far.
Yeah.
So
that's keeping him there. But
that's not what it's keeping him in the team, though, George.
But we need the pressure from those forwards. You just can't. You can't allow the ball to exit that easily. We've got to keep the ball in there when the rest of the team have worked so hard to get it down. So there's a lot going into the forward line. It's still being experimented, still being rotated. Let's wait as we progress through the season to see what the best one is, because I'm sure Goody will be able to work it out by the end of the season, the same as he has in the past.
I'd say that my theory to a degree is that he is experimenting and happy to do so. He did it last year. He did it in 21. I think he's doing it again this year. He's happy to play the same. You could basically play a presser from him for the last 3 years at this stage of the season and say the same thing. We're still looking at our best mix-up forward. Just on the small forwards, none of those small forwards are coming out, George. There's not a chance. There is zero chance that Spargo or Nibbler aren't playing.
No, I wouldn't take Spargo out by any stretch. He gets
or Nibbler. I mean, if you want pressure, he's incredible last night. His pressure, Alex Neil-Bullen, it was amazing. And he's not going anywhere. Chandler is the third most score involvements behind Oliver and Track in the team at the moment. Another player who's kicked the goal every time he's played this season, I think. So there's no way, though. There's no chance of Nibbler going out. He's a top 10 player. So he's not going there. In terms of the tall forwards, again, I'd point people towards Goody's presser, fascinating presser. And unless I'm misreading what his comments were, he's had a pretty clear dig at both potentially Brown and T-Mac. So it's important to remember both of those players played in the VFL game. So easily, we could have picked one of them. I can't remember exactly. So I'm paraphrasing here what Goody said. I can't remember exactly what he said, but essentially he was saying what we were looking for was an aerial contest. The implication being that T-Mac, who Brown had been out of the team, but when Brown was in the team and T-Mac, they weren't giving that aerial contest that we needed. So we weren't bringing the ball to ground. And what he said was the players we selected giving an aerial contest, including JVR. So I think that was a real tell as to one, it was a bit of a dig send T-Mac again back to the VFL to compete harder and to bring the ball to ground. It was a huge... it didn't get much conversation in the media, the fact that he didn't choose one of those two. I was really surprised because structurally it was a huge change. I mean, we talked about it last week on the podcast. His clear preference, so to answer the question in a long way, is that I come finals, it'll be a 3 tall setup. because it's not
agreed.
just the structure up forward. It's exactly what you were saying, Andy. It's the structure of running up and down the ground. People who were getting sick of Stephen May kicking to the 1 point on the MCG, well, they'd be happy now because he barely kicked it to that point at any different time. There was some, of course, some long kickouts, but not having T-Mac coming up the ground takes that option away a little bit because you can't constantly have Max being the one getting smashed into that contest. I think they learnt that from last year. So long answer is that I totally agree with George. They'll rotate those tall forwards. They'll probably give JVR a chop out. He probably would have got dropped if he didn't take that mark. I think they will rotate come finals. I think, assuming everyone's fit, let's say I think they'll go for the 3 tall setup. They'll have the resting ruck. Just on Max, he took 3 marks inside 50. I'm pretty sure, George, at least 2 on the lead and 1 contested just outside 50 and another one that he hooked. So I reckon he had 4 marks either inside 50 or just on the bubble. So that's not bad from a resting ruckman. But they're still going to do that. And 2 talls, Fritter, and the small forwards we talked about. So that's how I said that it would be a big change for Goody to move away from a 3 tall forward setup, and I personally can't see it happening. So I actually thought it was a huge. Speaking of experimentation, that was a gutsy thing to do, and it would have been so tempting to play one of Brown, given they both played a full game of VFL footy, couldn't kick straight, unfortunately. But
well, T-Mac got dropped, so there was obviously a message made there. A message, and Brown, look, he hasn't played for 3 weeks, so they obviously, but they could have bought him straight back into the seniors.
Of course, he was apparently almost ready to go 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So that was also
other question was Shaki. They could have brought him into the equation.
Exactly.
He was an emergency, and obviously that was predicated on whether Max Gawn was going to get up or not, but it seems like Max was always going to play. Anyway, we've got a question later about Shaki, whether we play him. I wouldn't mind seeing what he can do, and in the next 3 weeks, it's a good chance. Now I went to training, they had a captain's run where they invited, it was an open training session, and one of the things that two things that stood out. One, Spargo, who I thought he was still on concussion protocols, but he probably is towards the end of it. He was training with the main group despite the fact that he wasn't going to be playing. And I thought that was weird because usually it's just the 23 plus the 2 emergencies, because Laurie and Shaki were also training, but Spargo was there too, doing everything. And then I think he came off when they were going to be doing some more contact type stuff. But one of the drills that they did was kicking it high into the air and having the player, whether it's JVR or whether the tall player, Max, whoever, Grundy, just tapping it straight down, intentionally rather than trying to mark it, just tapping it straight down to the guys mopping it up in front of them. So I thought that was an interesting drill. So what you were just talking about, that bringing the ball to ground.
That's what they've got. I mean, you hear it all the time. If they can't mark it, those talls have just got to bring it to ground. And as I said, even reading between the lines, I expect that Tom Mack hasn't been doing that to the level that Goody needs him to.
And the drill was obviously the guys on the ground practicing mopping up from that situation, and then not just the mopping up, but then the dishing off, and then the chain of handballs and kicks that go from there.
Just on the small forwards, though, it's an interesting. Cozzy hasn't had a great season, I don't reckon, except for the one match before his suspension. I mean, he's in and out and his pressure's brilliant. But it seems to me they're playing him. He didn't go through the middle at all, hardly, in this game.
No,
I don't know what
he didn't at all.
But they seem to be playing him quite as almost like a traditional high half forward. Now, maybe part of that was to offset some of what we lost with Spargo, but he was also playing that role against Essendon and Sydney. It has the advantage, I think, when he's playing up on that half-forward flank, is that the centre bounces, he's 2 steps in and he's already... If we win that ball at the centre bounce, Cozzy's almost always going to be in that play. So there was a couple of examples. But also, if he wins the ball just outside 50, he's usually a brilliant field kick. And so, you're going to get really high-quality entries inside 50 when he's kicking it from outside 50. But I wonder whether, George, that's a factor in our, in our low tackle numbers inside 50. Although I didn't think it was too bad, our pressure in this game inside 50, but maybe the numbers weren't so great.
Nudge in our chat room has asked a question that I think we were going to talk about, but no one had asked a question about, and I don't think you brought this up. I don't think you did earlier. He says, what are everyone's thoughts on the backline issues, ground ball especially, and the general fumbleness of the side lately? So, Big Man, were you wanting to talk about the ground ball, in defensive ground ball issues that we're having?
I think it's a huge
stats on
issue. We haven't had, it was glaring. We were down 10 at the end of the first quarter. We were down 10 ground balls in our forward half, I think. I can't remember if it was forward half or across the ground. It evened up a little bit in the second quarter, but they had the much better of the first half. So we're down 10 after the first quarter. I reckon we're probably down 15 or something, halfway through the second, but we ended up.
But is that in our forward line or our back line?
I think it must be over the ground. But initially I thought it was the forward line, but I'm not sure if they drill the stats down that. But we ended up only 7 down at halftime, so we improved it a little bit. But that was the comment from Hardwick, which was fascinating because he was asked about in the presser, did you come? You obviously came into the match with a plan to do low flat kicks into the forward line. And he talked he leveraged off that question. I'm not sure why, but then talking about, we know how to beat Melbourne. We know what to do, and that's to get the ball in. And he didn't really finish his comment, but the inference was that you get it in quick and they struggle when the ball hits the ground down back. And we do. We've had that issue since Jets was so brilliant in 2018, and we've talked about it a million times on the podcast, is the players that really give us the biggest challenge, the Papleys and those small, medium players like Brisbane are full of, and Richmond, like Noah Cumlin in the first quarter. We really struggle with that ground ball. And he seemed to be implying, Hardwick seemed to be implying, is that it's a part of our system. It's a system-based problem, not just a personnel problem. But again, maybe I'm misreading his comments. But it was a fascinating comment. Basically, he said that we came into that plan, we know their weakness, and it's absolutely a weakness. They killed us. The ball hit the ground, and it was a bit like last week. The ball went in long for their forward line. I expected them to mark it. Well, the ball hit the ground, and I expected them to pick it up when they were entering their forward 50.
Yep.
I think it's a big issue, and I reckon Bowie's been down in the last few weeks, and I thought he had a really poor first half, but I thought he had a brilliant second half, and partially it was because he was so much better on the ground and getting the ground balls. We really picked that up. Goodwin also talked about that ground ball issue in the presser. He said, I think his quote, again, paraphrasing, was something like, it was a big issue. We needed to sort it out. We really did need to sort it out.
Bowie's smother right near the end was fantastic.
Yeah, that last minute or two of the game was pretty frenetic, wasn't it?
Lefty says, how good has our set shot kicking for goal been this year? Kudos to Choco. Whatever he's doing, it's worth every cent we're paying him. He just needs to work more with Max. Big Max, he had a few opportunities to kick some real captain's goals and just didn't nail them. If we're going to be using him more and more up forward, it has to be more reliable shot on goal. Can you, man, or even George, can you believe the turnaround in our goal kicking accuracy this season, particularly from set shots? I think we kicked, you mentioned it before, 9 goals 4 or 9 goals 5 from set shots. Conversely, the Tigers kicked 6 goals 9. In our match against them last season, we kicked 9 goals 22 in total for the match. Just our kicking for goal has improved. We've talked about it before. You said with Langdon, Clary as well. Everyone's kicking for goal has improved out of sight. In the West Coast game, Petrarca.
It's so critical, isn't it?
Yeah, and the proof was in this game. Kick accurately, you win games. It's as simple as that. And we keep getting the opportunities. That hasn't changed, I don't think, all that much. But kicking the goals, that critical Oliver kick in this game, right on the 3/4 time siren, that almost guaranteed what the result of the game was going to be. Just brought us back into it.
You kick a point and the heads are down. You kick the goal and look at the electricity flowing through the crowd.
Van Rooyen's kick from his first mark was the same. There was 3 points the difference. he nails that straight through the middle, and all of a sudden the opposition's heads drop. He kicks a point, and they're still in the game.
And they've got the ball, and they can take it down the field, kick a goal, and then they're
makes a big difference. So the extra time that Choco spent with the boys over summer doing kicking from set shots in particular, but he's also spent a lot of time working with them on the snaps as well. That we're getting the opportunities when they do get that small opportunity to improve the accuracy from various locations on the ground. So it's been a great improvement. It's a delight to be talking about us as a good kicking side now.
It is so massive. I reckon you could mount an argument to say without our improvement, our evident improvement in our kicking for goal, which is in part helped by the fact that we're playing more centrally, so we're taking more shots from better angles. But there's absolutely been a massive improvement in our set shot. I think we're number one for accuracy in the AFL, which we were last week, which I can't think anything would have changed this week, which is remarkable to think. There's an argument to be made that without that improvement, we would have lost two of the games that we won. We would have lost this game. And exactly as you say, George, it's not just the fact that you get a goal that, you might have got a point, because who knows, it's also the way that it influences the momentum and where the game's heading. Like the energy in that crowd completely just shifted after Van Ruin kicked that goal. But it wasn't, you mentioned the heads dropping, Andy. They'd missed two absolute sitters before that. So, not only would the fans drop their head, it'd be hard for the team not to drop their head after, because it was clear at that stage by the game is that they were starting to struggle with the running, weren't they? Holes were opening up. We were spreading them. But just, it's a cliche that good kicking win matches. We talked about the importance of Oliver, but there were two equally important goals. One, we talked about Langdon's goal, but the other one was Petty. Now, he went back at the end of the third quarter. We kicked the last two goals of that quarter, Langdon and Petty. And Petty was only 30 metres out, slight angle, but they're the ones that my heart's in my mouth most years. Both of those players go back, split the middle. The game is completely different. We go into the last quarter, full momentum and rolling.
Lazy wants to know, did we get out of jail free in this game? Richmond kicked 8 behinds in the second half, a few free kicks spurned in those. I was really impressed with the way we rallied and got the W, but our efforts and desire in the first half looked a lot like last week, and I can't help wonder if a better side would have put us to the sword. George, did the Tigers did the Tigers not put us away, or did they kick themselves out of the game a bit later on?
Well, they certainly kicked themselves out of the game. I was astounded when, for example, Rewalt missed a couple of absolute sitter set shots for him. He doesn't miss those as a general rule. And we got up by 18 points. Was it 18 points in the end? 3 goals. If he'd kicked straight, they would have been well and truly in that match. They certainly were missing critical players. I mean, Lynch would have been a huge positive if they had him in the game. You take your luck as it's provided, but they certainly let us out of jail with their poor kicking, and we kept ourselves in. With our good kicking, so a bit of both, and we did it at the right time. So that was good. But could have been a very different result in this game.
Yeah, I mean, good kicking is good footy. We've lost plenty of games in the reverse situation. So there's no such thing really as a free pass or get out of jail. Is there? You take them when you can get them. That's for sure. The Petty and Langdon goals were actually in the second quarter, I should say, of course, because Oliver was the third quarter. But that was really critical because I thought we had the better of the last 10 minutes. And even though the score, we kicked those 2 goals, and in between those goals, Jaden Short missed a very gettable goal. So, the game, that meant that we went in at halftime at 14 points. Without them, we're 4 goals down at halftime, and things are looking different. If we miss one and Jaden Short kicks that one, that was a really critical period in the match, I thought, to keep that pressure. We could see we started to get the numbers tracking our way, and both of those kicks were super important.
Kiwi D says, while we've all been stressing about whether Cozzy will re-sign, Cade Chandler's quietly kicked 10 goals too this season, kicking his second bag of 3 goals in this match. He's hit the scoreboard in every single match this season. Well, I think we've talked about the forwards. He's certainly not going anywhere. Casey. Well, how can
he might
you
be this week. He was at the having scans this morning.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, we'll do that later.
Oh, okay. George got some intel that I don't have. I should read my own website sometimes.
No, don't worry about the website. This is the news reporters hanging around the outside of the Amy Park.
Wow. Okay. So Spargo in. All right.
No, he's not in either. So
why is he not in? Because of the days?
Same reporter. Concussion.
Oh, geez. Okay. Casey. The Casey Demons lost their first match in 630-odd days at their fortress, Casey Fields, going down to the Tigers by 14 points. Casey team consisted of 14 AFL-listed players, whereas the Tigers only fielded about 6 AFL-listed players of their own. Returning from injury, Ben Brown inaccurately kicked 4 behinds, whilst Tom McDonald, who was relegated back to Casey, was also inaccurate with 1 goal 3. So much for the Choco Williams goal-kicking academy that we were praising just moments ago. It must not translate well to the wastelands of the Cardinia Shire. Luke Dunstan was a tireless worker for the team and combined strongly with James Harms in stemming the tide and bringing the team to within a kick or two of regaining the ascendancy in the last half of the game. Dunstan racked up an incredible 48 possessions and kicked 2 goals, whilst Harms had 29 disposals and kicked 3 goals. Daniel Turner was rock solid in defence, often against a deluge. I think that's enough of Casey. I don't know if you guys didn't watch any of it.
I watched about 10 minutes of the last quarter, and it was quite frustrating to watch. I don't know how about you, George. You watch it?
No, I missed it completely. I just read Casey from Casey's report on Demonland this week, and
that was
I think he summed it up pretty well. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because that ground ball nudge in the chat room makes an interesting point that I'd heard as well, is that the Tigers small forwards won more ground balls than our backman in the first half, which is just nuts. I mean, they're not good numbers. And the link to Casey is, well, who is, we need, the inference is that Hardwick was saying that's a structural thing, and Nudge makes a point there that it's that handball out the back, and then maybe, I guess the implication we're not set up properly for that, and that other clubs are aware of it. Brisbane, he makes the point that Brisbane took advantage of that as well, and they certainly got plenty of goals from the mediums. So the question would be, leaving aside that structural question, which player in Casey could come in and play that small defender role? I've heard people talk about potentially Howes being that player, but he strikes me as he's a bit tall for that sort of player. It's the same for Hibbo. Hibbo's not really, he's been forced to play that role a little bit in the last couple of years, but he's too physically big really for that role. I don't know, George, who do you think at Casey could potentially? I was actually thinking maybe Chandler could go back, but then you don't want him out of the forward line. Yeah,
the only other one at Casey that I would be thinking would be maybe Will Woden, although they've been playing him more in the middle and up the ground. Andy Monez Wakefield.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, but
is another one that's a possible.
Have to work on his defence a bit.
But he certainly hasn't been played in a defensive role that I can recall. Again, he's more around the ground, up forward. But no, we don't have it. We don't have those small defenders. The other defenders we got, the Kai Turners just started. Disco's a tall as well.
There's not anyone who immediately comes to mind.
No, there's not really.
All right, well, let's move on to changes. D. Minion says, is Stephen May injured? The last few weeks he seems to have some difficulty bending over. I wonder if he has a niggle that he is playing through. Can't fold his effort. Took some great marks too. The next few weeks are the time to manage him and maybe a few others with no disrespect to our opposition. And I guess we seemingly have a soft draw, as we've alluded to, coming up with games against the Kangaroos, the Suns, the Hawks, all currently teams in the bottom 5. I'm not suggesting that we take any opposition lightly. We've seen what that type of attitude and thinking, we've seen how that plays out. Are we likely to manage some players in the next few weeks? And what would you do, B-Man, if you were on the selection committee?
Well, one thing is that, we did have this conversation last year, and, what I would do and what the coach would do are probably more aligned now. I mean, people were crying out for it last year, but, it wasn't happening. But he's put, he said already that, that they'll be looking to manage players, and they've been open about it. So they may well. The question about Steve May, he does not look right to me at all. Like, there's a couple of factors at work. The speed of the ball movement in footy at the moment makes it really difficult for defenders to get that zone set up. So there's less packs. That's where his strength is hitting a pack at speed. They're deliberately trying to isolate our key talls and create more one-on-ones. That's always going to be harder. It doesn't matter how good the defender is. It's always harder one-on-one. You haven't got your teammate to come across and to help out with the zoning but leaving that aside, and the sort of challenges of being a key tall at the moment, a key tall defender, is he doesn't look right to me. And I don't know. I mean, of course, I don't know what his medical stuff is, but he looks like he's got a back problem. The number of times he's not gone down to pick it up. The one where he gave a free kick, chopping, of taking the legs out from someone, that just looked really ungainly. And I don't know, but what do you think, George? He doesn't look right to me.
Yeah, he doesn't look right. I don't know whether he's being exposed or asked to do roles in the absence of Petty down there, where Petty would be picking up that third tall defender. Lever's back in the side, which has made a huge difference, I think, to the way that May appears to
awesome
play
in the second half too.
So I'm wondering whether having Petty back there would not expose May as much. But yeah, he certainly doesn't look right at the moment. He's just not free and moving.
He doesn't. Yeah, exactly. And his injury that he had was variously described as either a calf or lower back, and that's what it looks like. It looks like a sort of, he's not quite as mobile as he is. Just on Petty, George, and Andy, we didn't answer that question about where we see him. I see him going back and only ever being a part-time forward. I don't think there's, obviously could well be wrong, but I don't see him as part of the future up forward. It's horses for courses, and I think come finals time, he'll be back, and it needs to be.
Well, he was up forward this week in the absence of both Ben Brown and T-Mac.
And he was
competed well.
Yeah, so, and he was moved back in the last quarter in this game. I don't know whether people
when Rivers went off late.
That's
when he went
Petty
back.
was moved back. So the old break glass scenario again. Yeah. But it's nice that you've got someone who can do that sort of thing. But just on further ins and outs, going on Channel 9 News tonight, Chandler was shown hobbling into the scam site at Amy Park with a corky. So they're scanning, obviously, to see how much bruising is there. I wouldn't be surprised, given it's a 5-day break, that he might be. He may not come up this week. The other one that they mentioned was Spargo. We know it's 12 days for the concussion protocols, but that's the minimum. So whether he's not, they said Spargo won't be available. Again, as reporters, so take what you may out of that. But if he isn't up to scratch following his concussions again with a 5 days to the next one, here's another opportunity to give him a decent rest, particularly against what you might see as a lowly opponent. The other one that was Hibberd. I don't know whether you noticed late in the game, it was really late in the game, he was trying to kick the ball, and he finished up kicking it straight to the opposition. He grabbed at his calf pretty quickly. He's had the Achilles problem, and if you look at some of the footage, the interviews after the game with Viney, I think it was after the game, Hibbert's in the background. He's got a big pack of ice on his calf Achilles area. as well. Now that might be just be management, but yeah, he was certainly feeling it at the end of this game, and I suspect there's a lot of players were feeling it at the end of the game. It was a physically demanding
It
game,
was, yeah.
this
Yeah.
one. So yeah, you might see a few people use the word rested this week, but it's an opportunity.
We can't make wholesale resting changes.
No.
You don't want to disrespect the opposition. We'll end up with a loss and scratching our head. How did we lose to North?
Yeah,
but this sets up, though, doesn't it, for the classic example of where you might consider resting, managing, all of those sorts of things that people were crying out for last year.
You've got to be smart about it. You got to be smart about it. You can't do it all at once. You got to stagger
I don't think.
it.
I mean, Goody just doesn't strike me as someone who's like, if he assesses that the best thing to do is to rest him and we'll still beat North, I don't think he'll still respect the opposition. I just don't think he would think resting 4 players is disrespecting North Melbourne, and it's a good test, isn't it? If Steve May is got any sort of struggles at all, why not manage him?
Yeah, and the people we've talked about are at various points in the ground. Chandler's a forward. Shaki was available. Ben Brown would be available. T-Mac available to come in fulfill those roles. Hibberd and
Laurie to
Laurie's one. Hibberd, if he doesn't come up, here's your chance to run a disco turner or something like that. You might make a large number of changes, but they're not. You're not taking all the people out of one area, or you're not missing all your mids or something like that. So if you go into the game resting Gawn and Grundy, then you might have concerns, but that's not going to happen either.
And the other factor at play, and I really think this is an important one with this group, that the downside of the approach they took last year, leaving aside the impact on fatigue and injury management and that sort of stuff, the downside is that you don't give players an opportunity to play at the senior level. So, bring the opportunity to bring in a House, to bring in a Laurie, to give a player like Disco Turner another run, or, even a Moniz Wakefield, anyone who's pushing for selection, even a player like Dunstan, whose numbers have been just nuts in the last this season. And, you've got to admire anyone who's prepared to play at that high level and not get a crack at senior footy. These get, and this is not disrespecting North Melbourne, but 5-day break gives them the opportunity to say, well, okay, maybe there's a benefit to bring fresh players who are psychologically raring to go and who aren't coming off a tough game against Richmond.
I would. If we are going to rest May, I would like to see Disco Turner come in. I don't want them to use Tomlinson again. Don't disrespect him. He trains very hard. He plays well. I felt very sorry for him in 2021 when he did his knee, because he was having a great year. But I don't know. I want to see
not in that key position role.
Give Disco Turner a go. Matt Demon says, love the pod, guys. The forward mix is definitely an issue at the moment. Luckily, we have the time to get it right. Do you think it's time to have a look at what Shaki can offer? Personally, I'd like to see Petty go back and see what a forward line of JVR, Shaki and Gawn/Grundy looks like. Keep up the good work. You think we could see Shaki get a go? I guess...
As part of that rotation George talked about, I think there's almost certainly he will be played at some stage. And to be honest, if T-Mac... that comment from Goody really suggested that T-Mac's contest wasn't up to scratch at the moment, and if that continued to be the case and Brown gets injured, Shaki could well find himself being the tall in the team. He's played good footy.
Well, he was the emergency this week. He didn't play for Casey this week.
In the games that he's played thus far, he's had a great season so far. So he's kicked multiple goals, I think, a few times. So, but just on George's comment before, it's really interesting that you're right, George. It's interesting that Track hasn't pushed forward at all. Hardly. I hadn't really sort of thought about that, but he's not really playing that forward role. He was 37. He split last year. I don't know what it would be this year, but perhaps he's resting more on the bench. And just on Track, there's a comment in the chat room about our general fumbles. About it was off in that first half. It's right. We have a lot of examples where we just weren't one touch, and Track was one of them. He fumbled a couple out of the centre where we were away, but I was thinking about his game and wasn't super impressed with his game as a whole, but it just sneaks up on you. I've just read before that he where is it? He generated 12 inside 50s in this game, which it's his second most inside 50s ever in his career. And he led the match in metres gained with 605 metres gained. And, here's me thinking he's had a relatively quiet game and, like
no,
Oliver.
he was good. Track, he had a few times where he was quite explosive and, they just can't get him when he just explodes out. I thought he played well.
But maybe it's like, you mark him so high because I was thinking about the fumbles.
Exactly,
he fumbled a few times.
No, he did. Where he just, not that he fumbled, he just didn't get it just wasn't sitting right. And I think that, the ball wasn't bouncing for us. You get the luck sometimes. Nudge in the chat room has also said that Goody ruled out Spargo and Brown for this week. And he says May definitely has lower back issue and fighting through it with difficulty, but word is each week he will get 5% better. I would love to know where that word is coming from. It sounds like last year that we just play through injuries, they get better as they go.
I've been hoping to get 5% every year for a long time now. It doesn't seem to work that way.
Depends on the starting point.
Yeah.
We had, before we get into the preview of the Kangaroos game, we had one more question. Oh, it's not a question, it's more of a comment from one of the D-Milan posters in the podcast thread. It came in very late. Usually when they come in late, I don't get to them because I can't be. Got to do preparation. Got to cut off at some point. But Borgzilla says, so in 2021 at the start of the season, I was feeling very nervous and anxious in the first few rounds of the year. It was not until the first loss and recovery the next week that I felt like we were actually playing well. I feel like our recovery this week against Richmond was a good sign of the team starting to knit together again. Of course, I would love us to win by 6 goals every week and walk to premiership number 14, but we know that will probably not happen. I think there were good signs this week, and the last half is how we should be playing a majority of our football. Love seeing Max back. Clary is the best Melbourne FC footballer who has played the game, and Rui's coming along very nicely. Have a great podcast tonight, boys. Look forward to listening tomorrow morning on the way to work. Go D's. Hi, Borgzilla. Tomorrow, driving to work. Hello. Thanks for that.
Just one more thing on the Nudge makes a point, which is a good one, that Salem is to a large, we've really missed Salem's work on that small defender. He'd be the sort of player that you could at least send to one of those smalls, although, he plays more of that sort of quarterback. But we've got now, McVeigh playing that role, haven't we? And sort of that would allow Salem to pick up and take a more one-on-one role with one of those small forwards that gives us so much problems.
Speaking of Judd McVeigh, you can head over to wherever you're listening to this podcast, and that should be the podcast before this one is my interview with him from the other day. Check that one out. I was very impressed with him. Sounds like he loves being at...
Yeah, a great interview.
Sounds like thanks, mate. This sounds like he loves being at the club, and he's just loving footy and playing for the D's. And I particularly loved how he said Salem has taken him under his wing, and Salem said to him, what's your goal for this year? And, he sort of told him, and he said, no, your goal is to play round 1, and we'll do whatever we can to get. And he played round 1.
And it was great to hear too that he really, really, before that, he really pumped up the role Tomlinson played.
Yep.
And so I think that it really struck me, that interview, and thinking about how important the whole culture is. And, that's how development happens. We had decades of exactly that not happening, of the senior players. I mean, Tomlinson struggling to get in the team himself. Judster's potentially going to keep him out of the team, isn't he? And still he's pumping him up. Just on him, he did something brilliant at the 16-minute mark of the last quarter. Hunter brilliantly trapped the ball and sort of got it to McVeigh, and McVeigh off balance kicked it to Sparrow down the line and ended up getting crossed. But it was just an incredible kick. Under pressure, he was hemmed in on the boundary line. Left foot, I think from memory, left foot. To be able to not kick it on the full and get it down the ground was just, he's got something about him that's, he's got time.
Exactly. Very composed when needed.
It was another thing I liked about the interview. I posted it to our Facebook page, and it must have gone around sort of Geraldton, because there were a lot of McVees commenting and liking it, and people in the community who know him, and they're all sort of all on board the McVee train. And it must have been someone who was his aunt or auntie and was rapt that he mentioned that he did running work with his pop. I'm not sure whether his pop's his dad or his grandfather, but yeah, it was just it must be a great story when someone from sort of a smaller community, makes it to the big time and is recognised. And another thing I loved about it, at 15 he was playing in the seniors, the senior team there, playing against men twice his age and size, and I just love stories like that. So yeah, good on him.
It's a real crew. That was another interesting thing. But it's a real crew, as you asked him, that crew of WA boys.
Yep.
And speaking of which, one of the funniest things I've read in ages on Demonland today is Freo fans starting to complain about why they did go after JVR, because they had the pick. They could have taken him. They could have gazumped us and grabbed him before we ever got to him, because I think they had pick 10. And I don't know what the details were, but they've got complaining about getting Jackson and not picking up a boy who lives in their state, who's right there under their noses. And Judson might be the same deal.
Welcome to our world. How many times have we said we had 5 picks before this guy was picked up and is a champion? So yeah, I don't feel sorry for you. And if anyone wants to follow the Freo saga and our draft pick, there's a great thread on Demonland that you can, what's it called? What's the German
Death riding Freo.
But what's the German word? Schadenfreude.
He's not a bad footballer, but
reveling in look, if you want to listen to the Judd McVee interview, head over either to demonland.com. You can find links to it there, or wherever you're listening to this podcast, go and find that interview. It should be the one before this one. Preview versus the Kangaroos. Last year's Wooden Spooners, the Kangaroos, they've been a little bit more competitive this season under new coach Alistair Clarkson. After winning their first 2 matches, though, they did lose the next 4. George, Alistair Clarkson is a smart coach. He'll bring his best tactics to the table to try and curb any advantage that we have. How do you see this game?
Well, I think the chances of North were summed up because in the results of the game against the Suns this week. The Suns kicked 94 points to 54 or something. They were comprehensively beaten in Goldstein's 300th game. The coach can only do so much. At the end of the day, you've got to have the cattle. You can teach the cattle to run particular plans and do that, but you've got to have the cattle to do it. North are down the bottom for a very good reason, same as Hawthorn down there. It's all about the talent that's available, and they haven't got sufficient to certainly overcome Melbourne. I see Larkey was injured with an ankle this week. Whether he'll come up is going to be interesting. That's most of their forward line apart from Zerha. Harry Sheasel, young first-year player who's absolutely brilliantly talented.
He's a star, isn't he?
Yeah, fantastic. But he was held to 11 possessions in this game against the Suns. Difficulty with first-year players is they run out of steam, and he's being expected to do a lot more than perhaps
and I think he's been carrying an injury. They've been talking every week, and then he just keeps playing. So
playing as a pure mid too, doesn't he? Is that the position he's playing?
They've been playing him as a half back when he's played all his career as a half forward, which probably means they're just teaching him the defensive part of his game.
Yeah,
which is very.
But the fact is he's being run through the middle of the ground and in high pressure roles, and he's performing brilliantly. But they run out of steam after a while.
Yeah.
This will be round 7. So I think we've simply got too much available for them. Yeah, we've got a few people that we just talked about under some sort of injury cloud, but I think we've also got the depth that North don't have to be able to cover our losses if they are losses if they don't come up this week. So I think it'll be a one-way street. It'll be what I thought was going to be interesting, although I don't think see the game personally. would be Grundy versus Goldstein, because I think they both play a similar sort of rucking role. So I think that'll be a great contest to be able to watch. So expect full reports from you guys.
Well, that's right. George is George is leaving us, but we'll see him in a few weeks. Big man.
Yeah, it's hard to know what game plan they're sort of looking at with North Melbourne. But one of the interesting things that I've seen in their game and the commentators have noted during the game is that, like Collingwood, in a similar way, Collingwood like to really press up high from defence, and Collingwood back themselves in to get back and get behind the ball, where, as we know, Melbourne's sort of preferred setup is to have the goalkeeper, so like a triangle with the player back and a loose player back, which now that I think of it, didn't shape up that often really in this game just gone. And again, while I think of it, the previous week I'd heard it during the half time that we brought an extra to the stoppage, which again is an example of goody. I didn't realise that during the game, and I didn't hear anyone talk about it after the game. But in the Bombers game, we brought an extra to the stoppage, which means we don't have that player who's a loose player in defence. But North, similarly, as Collingwood, they like to press up super high off that half-back flank too, which means that it really opens them up. It's a risky thing to do for a team in their position in terms of building sort of confidence, because it really opens them up for big scores. The teams being able to put a big score on them because they can get out the back of their defence. And if they don't, so that it looks like they're not building a defensive system that's sort of analogous to ours, really more analogous to Collingwood's, and it could be a problem for them if they stick with it, because we've got exactly the sort of players who can exploit that Cozzy, that Fritter's ability to run back with a flight of it. While they're still working out their system, a bit like us in 2019 when it just didn't feel right, if they don't bring the pressure, they're going to get beaten by most teams by a fairly big score. And they could well bring the pressure and stay in this game, but will ultimately have too much power and with too much quality across the board, surely to lose this one.
Well, let's hope that we don't drop one that we should win. Guys, I think we've got to leave it there. And we'll be back next week at the regular time of Monday night at 8:30. If you want to listen to the show live then please join us at demonland.com on Monday at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers, Mr. Knowlesy and Max's mum. Thank you to our voicemailer, Noah from Bentley. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Man DeLorean, Bigfoot, Royal Demon, Red Sox Man, Delightful Play, Singer, Ratty Lade, Yes It Was a Win for the Ages, El Diablo 14, D Old Fart, Cos GTV, Lefty, Lazy, Kiwi D, D Minion, Matt Demon and Borgzilla. Thank you to my co-hosts George and Binman. Thank you to you, our loyal listeners, and don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll read it out on the show. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.
Come on, Demons. Come on, Demons. Come on.